Episode 19, From Russia with Gove. If you want to know what a country such as Russia is really like, listen to the jokes they tell. This one comes from much later than 1969, which I'm sure you will remember is our chosen year for a little light time travel into the heart of the old Soviet Union. But it speaks volumes about the country and its topsy-turvy history. The story goes that the Secretary General had suffered a heart attack, and his team of surgeons had nearly finished a triple bypass when they ran out of tarmac. Between 1983 and 1985 the Soviet Union had 3 heads of state, but I really hope the General Secretary referred to in this joke was Yuri Andropov. He seems to have been ill and frail even before he got the top job. Predictably, Comrade Yuri only lasted 15 months before he died and gave way to an older man, who didn't even last that long. Be honest, have you ever heard of someone whose name so aptly conveys his unique claim to fame? It may be only in English that the name Andropov is funny, but it's hard to resist the mental image of someone so moribund that he's already started to lose his limbs. However, some jokes are timeless. In the old Soviet Union, they tended to be more political than they were in Western Europe, often with a hint of amused bitterness and a perverse enjoyment of their own plight, which I can only describe as Freudian shade. These jokes do not translate well. For instance, when asked about their country's political ideology, the stock answer is that there is a stage between socialism and communism, and it's called alcoholism. See, I told you they don't translate well. Not hilarious, but true, so true. It's a moot point, but I have been wondering how long you need to spend in a country before you can say that you have visited it. Clearly, flying 5 miles above Afghanistan does not make me an expert, just as little as visiting a Turkish spice market and covering myself in salt and pepper would make me a seasoned traveler. So I'll run through Denmark, Sweden and Finland in the huge capable hands of Tiny the Belgian bus driver is all a bit of a blur. Not only is it still 1969, but we have somehow made up the time we spent in the exotic location that is Zeebrugge Docks. This is important to our twin guides Cesar and Paul, because they have booked us on a complex series of ferries linking the Scandinavian countries with each other and with the Holy Grail, St. Petersburg. Of course, in these Soviet heydays, the city basks in the glamour of the socialistically correct name Leningrad, so we probably can't claim to have visited the countries on our route apart from roads and more roads. The only memories I have of our journey through the Netherlands and West Germany are boredom and fitful sleep. For Denmark, boredom and a disappointingly small statue of a mermaid. Oh, I nearly forgot the meal on the Danish ferry. This smorgasbord looks like a free-for-all collection of random foods, but turns out to be an exercise in cultural conformity. Far from being the opportunity to pile your plate high with delicious-looking food in bizarre and sometimes unwise combinations, you are supposed to know what to select for each of 3 distinct courses. To make life more difficult for you, the foods that, thanks to ancient Danish tradition, belong together, are artfully scattered throughout the buffet like a culinary Wes Wally, alongside many a pickled red herring. And guesswork doesn't help, apparently. Fruit is fine with meat, but not with fish, and we never found out where the potato salad was supposed to go. You would think that visitors like us would be allowed to remain ignorant and choose combinations like blue cheese, whipped cream and smoked mackerel. After all, the customer is king, right, wrong, this is still the 60s. And the scowling waiter at the end of the line is actually king. I am losing count of the number of full plates he's swapped for empty ones, with a head gesture which clearly tells us to go back to square one and try harder. Without a bit of help from some of us, I think Paul would still be trapped in a maddening game of snakes and ladders, or should there be snacks and larders? Sweden has now taken the lead for road-based boredom, long straight single carriageways with the occasional comfort stop in the deep woods. Sheila's on one side and blokes on the other, Aussie style, except that everything here isn't out to kill you. We don't talk much on our bus, but there is a microphone at the front, which Cheza has used occasionally. Someone is making her way to the front. Oh yes, it's Ina, short for Angelina, I think, one of a party of 3 Kiwi nurses who told me they worked in a deaf school. It took me some time to work out what Ina meant, despite her helpful explanation that it's a school for children who are deaf. Quite why the deaf kids should need 3 nurses, I didn't have the heart to ask. Extrovert Ina is now in full flow, and I am pleasantly surprised by how much I understand of her questions to Cheza. We've been looking at the Swedish cars and we've noticed that the older cars and trucks have the steering wheel on the right, and the new ones have the driver on the left. Down under, we always have the steering wheel on the right side, which is the right side, not on the left, which is wrong. Right. Here they drive on the right-hand side of the road, so how come so many drivers here are on the wrong side of their car? Cheza simply shrugs, takes the microphone and opens up the question to everyone on the bus. I don't have the confidence to hazard a guess, but I can see where this is going. What we need is someone who knows all about driving, and who has been in this country recently. I sigh and move a whole row forward to sit immediately behind Tiny, who is blocking out most of Sweden. After a bilingual face-to-back conversation, I discover that Swedes had always driven on the left, but that 2 years ago in '67, signs wrapped in black plastic started appearing on the other side of the road. Overnight the plastic was removed, and people were told to drive on the right. There ensued several days of chaos before drivers started to get used to the idea. It takes considerable time and effort to translate Tiny's fluent Flemish. I attempt to answer Cheza's many questions without resorting to another round of Germanic sound shift ping-pong. I even make stuff up, but my blushes are spared by Paul, who grabs the mic from her brother's hand and yells, "They used to drive on the left." I admire Paul's directness, but I am now in full talking without engaging brain mode. I ramble on about Scandinavian inefficiency, and how much better we Brits would handle such a change. I don't know about the 1960s, but with my 2020 hat on, I can see what would happen. The Prime Minister would know such an undertaking is too much for him, majoring as he does in Latin and broken promises. He would turn to his rusty sidekick Michael Gove, who would draw up a plan to minimize disruption. Lorries and vans would switch to driving on the right in week 1, motorcycles and push bikes in week 2, with cars during the final week. The government would issue full guidance as to which category your vehicle fits in when it publishes its paper entitled Staggering Incompetence, Meeting Our Challenges Head-On. Things are looking up as we make our way through Finland. Not even the freezing wind can spoil the impression of a country that has got itself sorted, although a trip to the supermarket is a bit of a shock, with the price of a loaf roughly triple that of a pack of Mother's Shame back home. On the ferry to Russia, Cheza announces proudly that he has booked for us a traditional Finnish buffet. There's some concern that it might be a repeat of Smorgasgate, but there's not a whiff of food fascism here, just rows and rows of delicious grub and a multilingual sign saying, "Please keep coming back for more." As a typically Finnish touch, the scowling waiter at the end of the line has been replaced by a defibrillator. At last we're on Russian soil now, and I am beginning to regret inviting my parents along for the trip. We wouldn't have been on this adventure at all if my mum hadn't spotted the Quite how we got to be a party of 4, I'm not so sure. Anyway, I have been joined by the 1969 versions of my parents. Are still alive, and the beautiful Chandra, a friend of the family from what is now called Sri Lanka. To be honest, I was hoping to keep them out of the spotlight, but that was before my mother triggered all the alarms at the Russian border post, delayed our bus and its disgruntled passengers by more than 3 hours and attracted the attention of a KGB colonel. Well, she doesn't like to do things by halves. We have been waiting in a small office for ages, but things are starting to happen. They have finally tracked down someone who speaks English, a man in a grey uniform covered in what looks like scrambled egg and a peaked cap on steroids. He announces himself as a senior officer in the State Security Service, the KGB. So much for secrecy then. He apologizes for the delay and for the demolition of our luggage, which is news to us. He then asks the question we have all been dreading. Have you read Dickens? There ensues a conversation of a type my father loves, and the discussion covers a wide range of literary and social history. Big Hat seems content to let my dad do most of the talking, restricting himself to the occasional question, "What do you think of Dickens as a socio-political commentator? How much influence do you feel Dickens had on communist philosophy? Why is your wife radioactive?" Of course, my father has a ready answer to everything except the last question. It takes a few minutes of mutual puzzlement before my mother rummages in her TARDIS of a handbag and produces an NHS appointment card. Apparently, her thorough treatment included the use of a radioactive isotope, which is news to me. After a perusal of the card, our Soviet host seems satisfied. Colonel Big Hat shakes our hands and arranges for us and what is left of our luggage to be escorted to the bus. This little trip is turning into the theatre of the absurd, and we haven't got more than a few yards inside Mother Russia yet. Before we carry on, I'm afraid I will need a short break. But there's more weirdness to come, that's guaranteed.